All right, today's review is going to deal with section 5.4 and 5.5 of the AP European History course description. Just another quick reminder, it is located at AP Classroom, and we're talking about the French Revolution and the effects of the French Revolution today. All right, so the French Revolution is the most consequential crisis, conflict in European history, right? Everything in the first semester of this class was leading to this particular moment. The French Revolution is going to shatter the old regime. The old regime is the institutions that govern society, the absolute monarchy, the noble privilege, the state-sponsored churches, all of those are going to be imperiled by the French Revolution, and we will see new institutions rise and modern Western society really emerges out of the French Revolution. All right, so the big picture thing the College Board wants you to think about when you look at the French Revolution is to look at the causes, the events, and the effects of the French Revolution. And so those are the things that we're going to cover in this particular order. Oh, look, Missy likes the French Revolution. She stopped by to talk about it. All right, get out of the way. Okay, so first off, let's talk about causes. Causes, there are short-term causes for the French Revolution as well as long-term causes. And of course, the Enlightenment is going to hang over all of this as well. All right, so first let's talk about short-term causes. So immediately at this time, there is some issues going on inside of France. And the most obvious issue that leads to the French Revolution, oh, wait, Missy, is a series of poor harvests, rising cost of food in general that is taking place in the 18th century. Remember, population is growing, and so food's becoming more expensive. There are some bad harvests which limit the availability of food, which drives prices up. So there is hunger going on throughout France during this time. So bread shortages, a food crisis, the rising cost of wheat, all these things are referring to the same thing, is that people don't have enough food to eat, and that's going to make people cranky. That's, a historical term there. All right, the second long-term thing that we see the second short-term issue that we are going to see is the fiscal crisis that France finds itself in. For those who don't remember, the French state was very prosperous economically, but the French government was unable to raise revenues to provide essential services, mostly because the taxation system of the old regime was so messed up. Basically, the nobility paid nothing in taxes, nor did the church. These were huge landowners. These were people who possessed the vast majority of the wealth inside the French society. And so the bourgeoisie, the urban workers, and the peasants were expected to foot the taxation bill, and essentially they were taxed out. And the French state could not raise money to pay off debt that it had accumulated, and so its debt continues to rise. Their solution is to borrow money. There was a meme about this right here. There was the rising debt, and there was a series of reports that were done by Necker, which basically said everything was cool, but he was using pretty dubious accounting methods to come to that sort of conclusion there. So a fiscal crisis. And this is going to be exacerbated by the American Revolution, as the French will be the main monetary or the main support for that particular event, and that's going to make their debt even worse. So those are really the short-term issues that we see there. All right, so let's move on and talk about long-standing ones. So there were long-standing peasant and bourgeois complaints inside French society. Both of these segments of the society were unhappy. The peasants, generally speaking, were unhappy that their traditional rights were being infringed upon, and they generally wanted to have a restoration of those things. The bourgeoisie is going to be the more revolutionary group, though. If you remember, this is a pet peeve of mine, so much so that I even made a meme about it. The French Revolution is really going to be driven by the bourgeoisie. They are the ones who are the literate urban dwellers who are most influenced by Enlightenment ideas, and they are the ones who have gained positions of economic status but they are going to be very upset that they don't have any political or social status to match that economic threshold that they have attained. And so they are going to be the leaders of the French Revolution. When we get into the events of the French Revolution, almost all of the events we are talking about are going to be directed and led by members of the bourgeoisie, right? So the French Revolution is bougie, and it's the Enlightenment ideas, the ideas about limited government and religious toleration and civic liberties and a more rational society that isn't reliant upon tradition and, you know, appeals to, well, that's how it's always been, that's how it's got to be. They're going to move away from those sorts of things, right? Okay, so those are the causes. Let's talk about the events. All right, so the events of the French Revolution are broken into two stages. Those stages are phase one, the moderate political reform stage, and then stage two, the radical element. Now, showing which one of these is more exciting than the other, we have no memes for phase one, the moderate political reform stage, and we have a bunch of memes for the radical stage. So let's talk about the moderate stage. From 1789 to about 1792, 93, the French Revolution is relatively benign. It is not really violent. There's not great amounts of bloodshed. And there is, you know, some pretty substantial progress made in reforming the French political and social systems. So what we see in phase one is the creation of a limited constitutional monarchy. There will be a constitution created in 1791. It'll be known as the Constitution of 1791. There will be a famous document produced called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is really a blueprint for what the bourgeoisie want to do in France. So like I said, limited constitutional monarchy, an increase in popular participation in government, a nationalized Roman Catholic Church, which does not have nearly as much privilege and status as it once did, and the abolition of aristocratic privileges and the creation of this civic equality and meritocracy, where positions are no longer reserved based on birth and where everyone is going to be treated equally under the law. The biggest issue here is everyone's going to pay their fair share of taxes. Right? The National Assembly will become the legislative assembly that will be co-partners in government with Louis XVI, the king, who is not overthrown. He will eventually be executed, but that is the kickstart to the radical phase. So really all of these reforms are Enlightenment influenced. There's no widespread violence. There's no real radical actions that are taking place within society. There are three big things you need to know about the moderate phase. Number one, previously mentioned, the Constitution of 1791 and the Declaration of the Rights of Man. These are the blueprints for what the leaders of the revolution, the members of the bourgeoisie, want to accomplish. The Constitution of 1791 creates a limited constitutional monarchy. It creates a legislative assembly that will work with the king. It creates the idea of civic equality, and it promotes basic religious tolerance. The second thing we are going to see is a desire to impose rationality on a society that the leaders of the French Revolution felt was often, you know, beholden to tradition or superstition or irrationality. And the best example of this, I bet you guys already know what I'm going to say, is the metric system, right? Creating a uniform standardization of weights and measures based on tens and 100s. The metric system is going to be a long-lasting legacy of the French Revolution. Even when other things are undone, the metric system remains in place still to this day. And the second way in which they imposed rationality was that France had all these old provinces that had some autonomy, that were shaped in weird sort of ways because of traditional and historical developments. And basically what they do is they wipe that all clean, they get rid of the provinces, and they create departments, which are standardized units of administration. They have roughly equal population numbers, they're roughly equal in size, and it's going to create a more orderly and rational way of administering rules from the national government. And that is another thing that will continue to the present day. All right, and then the third thing is the civil constitution of the clergy. Basically, the French government is going to put the Roman Catholic Church under the control of the state. The state will pay the wages of the priests. They will train the priests. And really what the French state is trying to do is take authority away from the Pope and make the church a part of the French government. Now, there is also going to be a part where French priests have to sign a loyalty pledge to the civil constitution of the clergy, meaning that they are, accepting of the changes that are going on, and many of the priests will refuse to do so. They will be known as refractory priests. It is this action right here, right? The French state's relationship with the Roman Catholic Church that will most sour the people of France on some of the changes that are taking place. The peasants in particular, very conservative, and they feel that their church is being picked on and oppressed by the French state. Some feel that the actions of the bourgeois are making them choose between being French and being Catholic, which is not a very desirable position to be put in. And so this is going to be quite contentious. One other thing that the French government does during this time is they seize the property of the church. The Catholic Church was a huge landowner in France and were paying no taxes on it. The French government seizes those land holdings and then sells them to the highest bidder to raise revenue to pay off the debt. But of course, the French government goes too far and starts selling things that they don't even have, and it creates all sorts of inflation and stuff like that. I don't think that would be on an AP test, but certainly the seizure of church land would be an example of the French state making the Catholic Church subordinate. Okay, so that's the modern phase, or the moderate, phase. Let us move on to the radical phase. So basically, we are going to see the French Revolution is going to spiral out of control. Oh, wait a minute. I just found one meme that does a good job of talking about the moderate phase. This is an example of what happens to the French nobility, that loss of aristocratic privilege. All right. So what kickstarts the radical phase is what's represented in this meme. Louis XVI, always sort of dragging his feet at the changes that have been taking place, but too weak to really oppose them, tries to flee France. He is caught at the border. This is going to expose the monarchy as being opposed to the changes that are taking place. It's going to, what's the word I'm looking for? Enrage many of the supporters of the revolution, especially radicals who want to go even further. They're going to be able to point now and say, see, I told you the monarchy wasn't, in favor of these changes. We need to go even further. And so this is going to kickstart the radical phase when eventually Louis XVI is going to lose his head. And so what we are going to see is that the execution of Louis XVI is going to kickstart the radical phase of the French Revolution. And honestly, this is what most Americans think of when they think of the French Revolution. They don't think of moderate political reform and change. They think of the reign of terror, chaos in the streets, violence and bloodshed, and instability. That has become sort of the popular narrative of the French Revolution. So the main proponents of the French Revolution are going to be the Jacobins. And the Jacobins are a radical group of people deeply immersed in Enlightenment ideas, so much so that they want to create a republic of virtue. But the problem is that they are going to make arguments that basically say, hey, in peace, the best thing a democracy can be is virtuous. But in times of war, which we French now find ourselves in, the most important virtue one can have is violence, terror, attacking the enemies of democracy. Democracy is so fragile. These gains, the revolution is so endangered that we have to strike out against other people, right? And so this is going to lead to what is known as the Reign of Terror, where the Jacobins, and most especially Maximilien Robespierre, as you see here in this meme, are going to root out the internal opposition to the revolution, the saboteurs. And of course, at first, it's just 500 saboteurs in the whole country. We get rid of them, we're all good. But it's going to spiral out of control, and we will see tens of thousands of people arrested and executed during about an 18-month span, right? So this is a reaction, this radical movement, this radical phase is a reaction to internal resistance to the French Revolution, particularly the royal family and the peasants who don't like what's going on with the Catholic Church, and outside foreign opposition. We haven't talked about this yet, But the rest of Europe is not really cool with what's going on inside of France, seeing the nobility attacked, seeing the monarchy weakened, seeing the church weakened. And so Austria and Prussia are going to act very aggressively to the new French state that is emerging. And so basically, the Jacobins, Robespierre leading the call, are going to say there are enemies of the Republic everywhere, and we need to strike at them before they can undo everything that we have done. We must defend the revolution. Other members who are important, who are mentioned in the course description, Jean-Paul Marat, very famous for Jacques-Louis David painting The Death of Marat, and George Danton are going to be other Jacobins who fan these revolutionary and radical flames. The Committee of Public Safety is going to be the ironically named government apparatus that will round up these enemies of the Republic. And by the end, we are going to see people arrested in the morning, tried by a kangaroo court, really, in the afternoon, and executed by the evening, right? Eventually, this is going to end when Robespierre himself, as you can see here, is executed because he just keeps calling for more and more executions and purges and things like that. Now, there are other features of radical rule in France that you should know besides the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror is probably the most important one. But there are really 4 other things that we should talk about here. Number 1, price waging and fixing. Number 2, further attempts at de-Christianization. Number 3, the abolition of slavery. And number 4, the levée en masse. So let's talk about those 4 things right there. The first one is price and wage fixing. So during the radical phase of the French Revolution, the Jacobins imposed price freezes and wage controls. It's a really heavy-handed government intervention into the economy. Now, it's a big deal then. Many people are upset by this. It's done mostly so that the Jacobins can get the support of the working class, the artisans who want those protections against the capitalist reforms that have been ushered in by the bourgeoisie, which is kind of funny because the Jacobins are members of the bourgeoisie. They favor these capitalist reforms, but because they need the sans-culotte, the artisan class, to be their muscle in the street, they make concessions to them. But really, I think what's important about this is that future historians will look back on this particular moment of government intervention, and they will attribute it to early Marxist sorts of policies and practices and stuff like that. And so this is going to be used by later Marxist-influenced historians to argue the French Revolution is the beginning of the great communist movements that are to come. Okay. Number 2, de-Christianization. So the French Revolution attacks the privilege and status of the Catholic Church. The radical phase is going to wipe or attempt to wipe Christianity out as a practice, right? They are going to promote reason and rationality. Catholic churches will be closed. They will be renamed temples of reason. The church calendar, which has the Sabbath day every 7th day as a religious holiday, is going to be replaced by a new revolutionary calendar that is made up of a 10-day work week. And the 10th day is sort of a secular holiday called 10th Day. It is a huge failure. We did a DBQ about it, if you remember. But basically, it is an attempt to impose reason and get rid of the Catholic Church, which they see as superstitious. This is only going to make them have more and more enemies, as many French are devout Catholics and do not like what is happening with the church. If they didn't like trying to make the church a part of the state, they certainly aren't going to like shutting down of churches and shuttering them and turning them into new temples of reason and things like that. Abolition of slavery. We are going to see the Jacobins are going to abolish slavery in French colonies. Napoleon will undo that and apply slavery to their colonies, but it is going to help kickstart the Haitian Revolution in the American Revolution, which we'll come back and talk about. And then the last thing is the levée en masse. And the levée en masse is this idea of universal conscription. All French citizens grab a gun. You need to defend the revolution. And so laws are going to be passed that basically say any unmarried man must join the army. Married men are going to be in sort of an ancillary role, you know, like moving supplies and things like that. Women start knitting uniforms for the Revolutionary Army. And so what we see is the creation of a Revolutionary Army made up of citizen soldiers who are defending the revolution from enemies. It is going to create a huge army that Napoleon will make great use of when he begins to wage war against the rest of Europe. All right, those are the two phases. The last thing we need to talk about with the French Revolution is women's roles in the revolution. Let's see if we have any more guillotines or memes we can look at. Oh yeah, that's a good one. And this is all in line. You can look at that later. So women in the revolution. When the revolution breaks out, many women are enthusiastic supporters of the revolution. This here is a drawing of the Women's March on Versailles. Basically, a bunch of women who are demanding lower bread prices are going to march to Versailles. They're going to take the royal family and make them move back to Paris so that they can keep an eye on them. The royal family is not harmed at this time, but it shows how women were enthusiastic supporters of what was going on at first. But of course, every time we talk about women attempting to carve a niche into a historical event, and it's before the 20th century really, we have to throw up the disclaimer that although women were often enthusiastic participants, their participation was not really accepted by men. And what we are going to see is that despite their willingness, they are not really going to gain anything. They'll be excluded and sort of left out on the sidelines. Any gains they do make are temporary. And generally speaking, they are excluded from participation and benefit from this event. Now, some famous women who will participate: Olympia de Gouges, she shows up in the course description. She writes the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and women basically taking French revolutionary ideas and saying, if you're going to apply these to men, why don't you apply them to women too? And then there is also the Society of Republican and Revolutionary Women, which was also mentioned in the course description. We didn't talk too much about that. It's an illustrative example, so we don't need to know that. De Gouges is the one that I would go with there. All right, so that is the causes, the effect, or the events and the effects of the French Revolution. Well, we haven't gotten to effects yet. That's our next topic. So this is 5.5, the French Revolution's effects. Big picture, you need to know what are the effects that the French Revolution have on political and social ideas. All right, so number one, the French Revolution is going to have a big effect in the New World. Specifically in Haiti, it is going to inspire a rebellion there led by slaves who are going to seize control of Saint-Domingue, which is France's largest colony. It produces 33% of the revenue of all French colonial lands, and they are going to overthrow the planter class aristocracy, the white slave owners, and establish an independent Haiti, right? Now, another way that this impacts the New World is the United States. Early American leaders like Thomas Jefferson are very enthusiastic about what they see happening in France. They are filled with Enlightenment ideas. They have created the United States, which is based on Enlightenment ideas, and then they see the actions in France and they say, hey, that's great. That is exactly what we did. Liberty is on the march. But as the French Revolution spirals out of control, the Americans are going to begin to look a little bit more skeptically at what is going on. And the greatest example of the rejection of the French Revolution in America we can see is our refusal to adopt the metric system, right? Which still persists to this day because the metric system was associated with the Jacobins, and the Jacobins were associated with unruly, violent executions. Okay. Another effect of the French Revolution is great opposition on the continent. I had already made a point of mentioning this, but basically conservative voices all across Europe are aghast at what they see. Traditional institutions of control are being challenged by the French Revolution, and they don't like that. The most outspoken critic, a name you should know, is Edmund Burke, and he represents conservative reaction to the French Revolution that we see. Burke is going to criticize the violence. He is going to criticize the tyranny of Jacobinism, and he is going to represent the conservative voices of Europe very well. And basically, it's that the traditional forms of order are under attack: the church, the monarchy, and the aristocracy. Austria and Prussia are also going to invade France when the royal family gets taken hostage and then put to death. That's going to provoke a war with Prussia and Austria. Marie Antoinette is an Austrian princess, and so Austria has like a real stake in what's going on with the royal family inside of France. Okay, so that's it for today. That was a hopefully thorough and comprehensive look at the French Revolution. It is a very complicated and complex event. Tomorrow, we will talk about the rise of Napoleon and the export of the French Revolution to the rest of the European colony or continent. Until then, I will talk to you later.